Hello Anglophonians, and welcome to another episode where we take a look at the European comic culture. And don't forget to like and subscribe. This time it's Asterix's turn again, and this is a very special episode. Why? Well, because we've already somehow talked about it. It is Asterix and Cleopatra, and this story was turned into a movie, and in this series we've already talked about this movie. But nevertheless, let's now take a look at the comic story that came before the movie. Asterix and Cleopatra is the sixth story with Adventures of the Little Gaul and was published in episodes in Pilote magazine in 1963. The story begins with Julius Caesar staying in Egypt. If you look at the timing, this must be after the so-called Alexandrian War, because Cleopatra is Queen of Egypt. This means that her brother, Ptolemy XIII, suffered a defeat against Caesar and is already dead. And although the historical sources report a passionate love affair between Caesar and Cleopatra, it is probably not all sunshine and roses in the relationship. Caesar behaves like a bull in a china shop towards Cleopatra. He praises the size and power of the Roman Empire and describes Egypt as decadent and dependent on Rome. Cleopatra is correspondingly angry with her Roman guest, as her people have created so much: the great temples, the pyramids, the Sphinx. Caesar brushes that aside. Egypt used to be great, but not anymore. A bet is made between the two. Within 3 months, Cleopatra should have a palace built for Caesar. Then he will admit that the Egyptian people are not decadent. Cleopatra commissions the rather talentless architect Edifis to build the palace for Caesar. And 3 months is a very short time. He would need magical powers to finish it in time. But luckily Edifis knows someone who has magical powers, the druid Getafix, who lives far away in a small Gallic village. Edifis goes there by ship to bring Getafix to Egypt. Asterix and Obelix accompany him, with Obelix wanting to take his dog Dogmatix, whom he met in the last adventure, with him for the first time. Asterix is against it because Dogmatix is too small, but Obelix simply hides the dog in his travel bag. By the way, Dogmatix is mentioned by name for the first time in this adventure. In the previous story, he remained unnamed. Pilote magazine held a competition to see what name the little dog should be called. The winner was Edifis, as Dogmatix is called in the original French. Asterix, Obelix and Getafix learn that Cleopatra puts special pressure on Edifis. If he succeeds in the task, he will be showered with gold. If he fails, he will be thrown to the sacred crocodiles of the Nile. And Edifis has a competitor, an arch-rival, the architect Edifis, who would be only too happy if Edifis ended up in the stomach of the crocodiles. But at first everything goes well on the construction site. Thanks to the Gauls' magic potion, the Egyptian workers are able to erect the first parts of the palace in record time. But then Edifis begins to sabotage the work. With the help of a henchman, the supply routes are interrupted. The Gauls are trapped in a pyramid, and finally they are blamed for an attempt to murder Cleopatra. Then Caesar learns about the amazing construction progress on the palace. When he is told that there are 3 Gauls on the construction site, he immediately knows what is going on. He decides to do something himself so that the Gauls and Edifis find themselves between 2 fronts. The story is one of the first classics in the Asterix series. René Goscinny was inspired by the film Cleopatra, and accordingly, a few peculiarities of the American monumental film are parodied. The comic book, published after the story was finished being told in Pilote magazine, has a cover styled like a movie poster that proudly proclaims it to be the greatest story ever drawn. Below it is listed how many liters of ink, how many brushes and pencil, erasers, pages of paper, and so on were needed to create the comic. In a panel that shows a conversation between Edifis and Cleopatra, both initially speak in hieroglyphs, after which the narrative text indicates that the conversation will be shown translated from now on. In another panel, Edifis then shows a mouth movement that does not match the translated text, and the narrative text notes that the techniques of voice-over translation in ancient Egypt were not yet perfect. As the story progresses, Asterix, Obelix and Getafix visit the Giza plateau, where the pyramids and the Sphinx stand. Obelix then begins climbing around on the Sphinx. As he tries to get on top of her head to get a better view, the nose breaks off under his weight, giving the Sphinx the appearance we know today, without a nose. A note on the chronology: it is currently winter in Gaul in the story, which can lead to the assumption that we are no longer in the year 50 BC mentioned in the preface, but now 49. But we don't want to look too closely at it. Because if you look at the historical events, the conflict at the end of which Caesar followed his adversary Pompey to Egypt only began in the year 48 BC. However, 3 years later, in the story Asterix the Legionnaire, Asterix and Obelix will take part in the battle against Pompey's retainer Scipio, which took place in 46 BC. So we see that the timeline cannot be compared so closely with events in the actual world. These events take place in the universe of the Asterix stories and follow a different logic. Nevertheless, details are reproduced correctly here too, so you can see that comics and education do not have to be mutually exclusive. Let's talk briefly about the film that was based on this comic book story. The story of the film sticks very closely to the original, apart from small details. Of course, the songs in the film do not appear in the comic, and the pirates who are sunk at the beginning of the comic and only appear again at the end of the story are used again in the middle part of the film. However, the pirates in the film are drawn differently than in the comic, so Redbeard looks completely different. The film, nevertheless, takes full advantage of the fact that it is a different medium than a comic. Asterix's success story continued to gain momentum, especially with this adventure. And the next thing immediately followed. But that is another story, and will be told another time. So there you have it, Asterix and Cleopatra. Cleopatra, whatever. Cleopatra, Cleopatra, Well, this story. Next time we take another look at the Europa Park. Until then, take good care of yourself and see you